He said he'd never leave me. Cancer didn't listen, and now I talk to his picture every night. My name is Rachel Hart, and I was 38 when everything changed. When the words we'd joked about at our small-town altar, the promise that felt like a warm flannel in late October, turned into a quiet dare I asked the dark to keep. A vow I repeated under my breath while stirring macaroni for the kids and standing in the pickup line at Carver Elementary and running a damp finger along the side of our minivan. Tracing the curve of rust where the salted roads nibbled the paint away one winter too many. Because back then, it seemed impossible that a promise could be anything but a river you stepped into together forever. Especially in Maple Ridge, where we live close enough to hear the high school marching band practice on fall evenings, and boys ride bikes to the gas station for fountain sodas that taste like the color red. Where neighbors remember the name of your dog and drop off extra zucchini in August like it's a second currency. My husband Daniel made his promises in simple ways. Morning coffee set on the counter by my keys, a hand on my back on Sunday mornings when the church parking lot filled with minivans and balding dads tossing footballs in the side grass, the soft crook of his smile over a grocery list he'd scribbled at midnight when he couldn't sleep. Milk, eggs, cinnamon, because you'll want toast. And the way he'd whisper, "I'm not going anywhere." When I'd pretend to pout about his late-night woodworking in the garage, the little bookcase he never quite finished because there was always another little league schedule to juggle or a PTA flyer to tape onto the fridge with chip clip magnets we got free from the dentist. Our two kids, Eli and Nora, were 10 and 7 then, all skinned knees and gap-toothed grins, and our dog, a golden mix named Daisy with a tail like a metronome, herded them in circles as if they were wayward sheep. And every night at dinner we did our highs and lows around the table, the kids pausing to think because I'd always force a low out of the day like it was a vitamin. "Your low cannot be that you couldn't find your red crayon," I'd tease, and the highs were still the highest. Like getting to be line leader or catching fireflies after the mosquitoes found us first. And we moved through those days with the certainty of a set of well-worn steps to the porch. And then one Tuesday in September, the sky bright as a new pencil, the teacher wish list still taped by the classroom door, Daniel came home rubbing his side like something small had lodged there, a pebble you couldn't quite shake from your shoe, and he brushed it off with, "I'm fine, Ratch, just pulled something moving the ladder." And I believed him because he never made a fuss about much, not when his work as an electrician gave him nicked knuckles and calloused palms, not when the roof leaked, and he spent a night throwing a tarp over shingles in sideways rain while lightning made me swallow prayers. He ate dinner slowly and left a little bit of everything like he did when he wanted to show gratitude without saying it, and he tucked the kids in with voices for every character in the book, and then kissed my forehead with a half-laugh that made worry slice through me anyway, the kind that comes out of nowhere and pretends to be nothing until it is. The inciting incident came quietly, like most of the worst things do, a phone call from our family doctor after a round of blood work because I'd insisted. "Please, Dan, it's probably nothing but it's weird and I don't like weird with you." And he'd gone to the lab between jobs and texted me a thumbs up and a photo of his arm with a cotton ball taped to it, captioned Bravery Award. And then 2 days later the doctor said, "I want you both to come in." And everything in my chest went hollow and buzzy because you never want to hear the word both from a doctor about something that concerns one of you. And when we sat down in his office, the bad lighting, the potted plant too green to be real, the crinkle of the exam table paper too loud in the small room, he said the words carefully like he'd practiced in the mirror. "We've found something concerning," which quickly turned into stronger words and scans and malignant, which sounded like a word from a different language, because surely the language of our marriage did not include that word, and our normal life fell right off the shelf and shattered on the ugly beige tile. And later in the parking lot, Daniel leaned his head against the steering wheel of the minivan, and I pressed the heel of my hand under my rib cage because it felt like that would keep my heart from falling out. And we stared at each other, and at the car seat crumbs and the dinosaurs in the cup holders where tiny hands had left them, and he said, "Okay," like he was trying the word on, and then he said, "We'll fight this." Not because he was a warrior by nature, but because he was stubborn about light bulbs, and I saw the same bone-deep determination in his face now that I saw when he rewired an entire kitchen for a neighbor so she could make her famous Thanksgiving rolls without blowing a fuse. Maple Ridge didn't ask for every detail, but it knew anyway. In that way, little towns know who needs a casserole and who needs someone to mow their lawn. And very quickly, our porch became a drop-off stage for lasagnas and note cards with scripture I'd stick on the mirror and forget to read while brushing my teeth because my eyes were full of tears already. And my phone was suddenly full of calendar reminders for scans and oncology appointments and infusions in rooms that smelled clean in a way that made me want to breathe less. And the kids asked, haltingly, "Is Daddy sick or just regular sick?" And we told them the truth he could stand to hear and I could stand to say. Daddy has something inside him called cancer, and the doctors are going to help. And Nora's eyes were so wide I saw my reflection in them, and Eli's jaw set the way Daniel's did when he measured twice before driving a nail, and we all became new versions of ourselves in a blink. He handled the early treatment the way he handled everything, with quiet jokes and a notebook near the bed where he tracked the nausea and the slow burn of exhaustion, and the way the nurses at the infusion center made the day bearable by calling him Hun and finding the warm blankets fresh from some other kind of heaven. I learned the peaks and valleys of chemo days, the rhythm of the beep from the IV pump that blended with the hospital channel playing old comedies, the way Daniel would squeeze my fingers just a little harder when the big bag changed, and he'd whisper, "We're going to the lake when this is over." And we'd make lists on napkins of small things we wanted to do, like watch the meteor shower from the empty soccer field behind Miller Middle School. Have a picnic on the floor with peppermint tea and grilled cheese cut diagonally, because it tastes better that way. Teach Eli to throw a knuckleball, and let Nora paint our faces for the July parade. I started keeping a bag in the back of the minivan stocked with snacks, coloring books, a soft blanket, gum for the metallic taste he hated, and ginger candies a neighbor swore by. And I learned how to sleep sitting up in waiting rooms where the vending machine hummed and the air vents rattled and the coffee tasted like burnt rain. And I learned how to hold myself together in the school pickup line while Nora climbed in with a backpack that seemed too heavy for her small shoulders and told me about a science experiment with baking soda and vinegar, while I nodded and smiled with a brain full of medication schedules and insurance forms, and a heart that felt like a fragile glass ornament you wanted desperately to keep from dropping. Even in the middle of all that, we still had the life we had built for a decade and a half, with Eli's Saturday morning baseball and his coach yelling, "Eyes on the ball, Hart," from the dugout, and Daniel and I sitting in folding camp chairs we kept in the trunk, his hand finding mine under the blanket when the breeze kicked up, and Nora's art show at the community center, where construction paper flowers lined the walls, and she held up her picture with such pride I thought I might float away, and church on Sundays where the pews creaked like they were telling their own old stories, and a sweet older couple would always slip us a gas card and say, "Just let us love you." And I'd cry quietly, "God, please don't let me get snot on my sweater," cry. The first real curveball hit one Thursday morning when Daniel tried to shower, and I heard the thunk of the shampoo bottle hitting the tub, followed by a sound that made my body move before my brain did, a kind of low animal moan, and I flung back the curtain without thinking, the bathroom foggy, his fingers white-knuckled on the safety bar we'd installed like a small admission that scared me, and he looked so small, which he never did before, and he whispered, "I feel faint." And I got him to sit on the closed toilet lid and pressed his forehead with a cool washcloth like he was one of the kids with a fever. And I thought, it shouldn't be like this, and also thank God for a sturdy toilet and a wife's intuition. And then the dizziness passed, and he tried to smile and said, "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." And I swallowed hard and kissed him on the cheek, where the stubble prickled my lips, and tucked that moment into the part of my brain where I kept all the things I didn't want to think about when I was making school lunches. We had a system for the kids, for all of it. They had chores they took on with pride, Eli walking Daisy after dinner with the leash looped twice around his wrist, in case she sees a squirrel, Mom, and Nora setting the forks and napkins, smoothing them just so. And on chemo days, the kids' bedtime was a little earlier, and sometimes we'd pile into our bed and watch an old movie with the volume turned low, the four of us under the blanket like a fortress. And sometimes Daniel would fall asleep halfway through, his breath shallow but steady. And Nora would ask in a whisper, "Is Daddy okay?" And I'd whisper, "Daddy is fighting." And she'd take that as enough because children are brave in a way that breaks you and stitches you up at the same time. Our town rallied in other ways that mattered. The PTA mom with the always perfect ponytail organized a meal train, and then a car wash with bubble letters on poster boards the kids made. And the church ladies did a spaghetti dinner with paper placemats and red plastic cups and raffle baskets full of candles and hand soaps with scents like autumn breeze and sunshine. And a boy from Eli's team mowed our lawn and refused payment, because that's how his dad taught him to be. And I found myself standing on our front steps the day of the car wash holding a cardboard sign that said, "Thank you," while cars honked, and a teenager in an oversized sweatshirt made silly faces at Nora until she laughed so hard she hiccuped, and for a few hours I forgot to be scared. Then came the meeting at the hospital where the oncologist's voice was gentle, but his eyes were frank, and my stomach dropped before he even got to the point. "The latest scan shows that it's not responding the way we'd hoped," which in plain language meant the path we'd been running wasn't bringing us where we wanted, and I felt like the floor tilted under me. The poster behind him of a beach at sunrise suddenly offensive to me because how dare the light look like that in a room where someone is telling me my husband might not see our daughter's first day of 4th grade. And I took a breath and asked the questions you ask when you want to hold back the tide. What now? Is there another plan? Is there a trial? What do we do next? And the doctor nodded and said there were other things to try, and I wrote them down even as my hands trembled, because I needed to believe in the next and the next and the next like stepping stones across a creek. Here's a soft cliffhanger I didn't see coming. I found the shoebox under Daniel's workbench one afternoon in late winter when he was sleeping upstairs, and the house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hums and makes your bones remember every sound they've ever heard. And I had gone into the garage to find a tape measure to fix the hem on Eli's baseball pants, and the box was there. An old running shoe box with grease smudges on the lid, and a strip of painter's tape that said nails. But inside was not nails. Inside was the neatest stack of envelopes I'd ever seen, each one addressed in his careful block letters. To Eli, on your 11th birthday. To Nora, when you graduate 5th grade. To Ratch, on our 15th anniversary. To all of you, for the first snow. And a lump rose in my throat so fast I had to sit down on the little stool by the drill press, and the dust motes swirled in the slant of afternoon light, and I held the letters like they were fragile shells. And I knew in that moment, with a clarity that felt like a lightning bolt, that Daniel had thought about a world without him in it, our world, and that he had done what he always did, prepared, measured, cut carefully, this time cutting words into time like boards that would hold something up. I put the box back and went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, and when he stirred I said, "I found the letters," and he didn't pretend, didn't play it off as something else. He took my hand and said, "I started them when we knew, and I hope you won't need all of them, but I needed to write them anyway." And I rested my forehead on his chest and let myself breathe in the smell of his skin, laundry detergent and cedar from the garage. And somehow those letters made everything more terrifying and also more bearable. Because the future had his handwriting in it, and it made me understand in a way I'd been refusing that we were not fighting to return to before. We were fighting to create something true with the time we had, however much it turned out to be. That vulnerable night became the pivot, the way I bent around the wind. I started paying attention to the things he did without thinking, the way he left his socks inside out and loved those ridiculous game shows where people built things out of food, the way he took his coffee with a splash of cream and exactly 2 teaspoons of sugar. No more, no less. The way he'd double knot Eli's baseball cleats without comment, making sure the laces lay flat so they wouldn't fray. The way he'd tuck a stray curl behind my ear as I chopped onions, and I started talking to his picture then. Even though he was upstairs reading to Nora, I'd passed the framed family photo on the hallway table, taken the summer before at the county fair, all of us sticky with funnel cake and laughing because a bee liked Eli's hat, and I'd brush a fingertip over his face and whisper, "Don't you dare!" and "I love you," because saying it silently didn't feel like enough anymore. There were good days sprinkled in like confetti, days where he woke up feeling almost like himself, and we took the kids sledding on the small hill by the park. And he laughed so hard when Daisy tried to pull Nora's sled up the hill with her that he had to stop and gasp, his eyes watering from the cold and the joy. And one night in March, when the air pretended it might be spring, we packed a picnic and ate dinner in the back of the minivan in the driveway. The huge orange sky painting the neighborhood in a light so soft the houses looked like tin toy houses. And we told the kids about our first apartment, how tiny it was, and how we could hear the couple above us argue about whether it was called pop or soda. And he looked at me, and I felt that precise click of being understood, like a seatbelt buckling. Of course, grief hadn't picked a quiet corner to wait in and be civilized. It spilled into our lives even while he was alive, like when Eli asked, "Dad, will you still coach next year?" And Daniel's face did something complicated before he said, "I'll be there one way or another, buddy." And I had to go into the kitchen and stack plates very loudly for a minute, or the night Nora woke up at 2 in the morning and padded into our room and asked, "If Daddy goes to heaven, will he get to see me pick out my dance shoes?" So softly I thought my heart would burst, and Daniel, who was so tired it hurt to look at him, sat up and pulled her into the bed and whispered, "Baby, I'll see every dance, every single one, you hear me?" And she fell asleep with her cheek on his chest, and his eyes swallowed the moonlight, and I stared at the ceiling and counted breaths. Spring came like it always does, stubborn and green and smelling like damp dirt and hope. And with it came another scan and a new plan because the last drug wasn't doing what it promised, and the doctor had that careful tone again, but I didn't want to hear it. We started another treatment. We cut back even more on anything extra. I picked up substitute shifts at the elementary school office. Answer phones and bandage scraped knees and call for parents who forgot early pickup. And I got aside gig making signs for the baseball fundraiser because I had a decent hand lettering thing going. And Daniel tried to work some when he could, his boss beyond kind, letting him do paperwork or light tasks so he felt useful. And he would come home exhausted and apologetic, and I'd say, "Hey, you're not a machine," and he'd laugh. "Tell that to the dryer," which had decided that was the month to stop spinning. And our friend from church came to fix it and took his shirt off because it was hot in the laundry room, and I watched the scar on his shoulder and thought, every person I know has something. The next soft cliffhanger slid in on an ordinary Saturday in May when the sky was the color of a robin's egg, and the baseball field smelled like sunscreen and freshly mown grass. Eli was up to bat, his little cheeks pink with determination, and Daniel insisted on coming even though I suggested he rest. He brought a folded chair and a cushion, and we set it under the tree right by third base, and he ate a popsicle and shouted encouragement in that hoarse voice Chemo had given his shout. And then in the fourth inning he leaned over and said quietly, "Ratch, I feel weird." And for a second the world narrowed to the exact shape of his mouth, making the word weird. And then his eyes slipped slightly to the right like he was trying to catch something falling, only he didn't know what. And I called to him, and he didn't answer, and the popsicle fell from his hand and hit the grass, and the sound of it was the worst thing I'd ever heard. And everything after that was a blur of someone yelling, me bolting, the coach catching him under the arms and easing him down, a teenager running to the concession stand to get ice like that could fix it, somebody calling 911. The kids herded toward the dugout, Eli's face white as chalk, Nora clutching her water bottle with both hands, and the ambulance lights made a candy cane swirl across the field, and everyone was too polite to stare, but they couldn't help it because it is unnatural to see a young dad on the ground at a little league game. And I rode in the ambulance and counted the bumps in the road because I needed something to count, and I called Mrs. Klein. Our next-door neighbor, who is the kind of retiree who knows everyone's business, but keeps it to herself like a vault, and she swooped in to get the kids and Daisy and a bag of clothes and all the things I would never have remembered. The hospital said there had been a seizure, and the images they took showed new spots that hadn't been there before, and the word, metastasized, became the imposer, sitting heavy in every conversation. And the doctor talked about options, but I could see he was also talking about comfort, and the tilt of our path angled again toward a horizon I didn't want. And in that white room with the 2 starched sheets and the view of a parking deck, Daniel squeezed my hand and said, "I need you to make the call when it's time." And I felt a wave of anger so hot it surprised me. "Don't put that on me," I hissed before I could filter it, and then I pressed my lips together and said more slowly, I love you, I'll make every call with you. And he said, You're my home. And I pulled the blanket up to his chest like it could protect him from mortality and whispered, And you're mine, and I hate this. We came home with new prescriptions and a folder of instructions, and our house changed shape. The dining room became a place for a hospital bed delivered by kind men who remembered Daisy from the last time they were here for a neighbor. A cart rolled in with wheels that squeaked. And the kids' drawings went up on the walls right away. Nora's rainbow with Daddy. You are my sunshine in big bubble letters. Eli's pencil sketch of home plate and a heart drawn where third base would be. And we moved furniture so there was room for the bed and still room for a couch so we could sit close. And I became the kind of person who knew what time to give which pills and how to help him sit without hurting and where to position the fan so he didn't feel like he was drowning in his own breath. And the hospice nurse with the freckles and kind eyes came by and said, This is sacred work. And I didn't feel sacred. I felt tired and terrified and also somehow steadier than I'd ever been. Like I'd tapped into some underground river that women before me had found when they needed to hold a family together and watch a man they loved disappear and stay anyways. The letters in the shoebox began to hum like a heartbeat in the background. I didn't open them yet because I needed them to exist in the future. Not now. But sometimes I'd slide the lid off and look at the addresses and feel myself breathe again, knowing there were slices of his voice tucked into time like pie in the freezer for a holiday you haven't reached yet. And then I would go back to the living room and sit on the edge of the bed and say, What do you want for dinner? And he'd crack an eye and say, Popsicles, and I'd say, Popsicles it is. And our neighbors would bring chicken and rice and fruit salad, and someone else would mow the strip of lawn along the side of the house and leave a note on our door in all caps. You are loved. And the world would feel bearable for exactly as long as it took me to read the note. We had one last family day in the backyard under the yellowing leaves, early fall sneaking in, and I strung up those white twinkle lights we'd bought on sale after Christmas and never used. And we set up a picnic on the patio with paper plates, and the kids, favorite kind of lemonade, and we played a game where we all had to list 5 things we loved about each other, and it was cheesy and it was perfect. And I took a picture of Daniel with the kids that I didn't know then would be the picture I'd talk to every night, his arms around them, his face thinner but still so him, his smile soft and present, and Nora put daisies in his hair, and he wore them like a crown and said, Queen Daddy. And Eli rolled his eyes and laughed a real laugh that threaded through the evening and made me believe for a minute that we were just any family having a late summer dinner. The next week, Daniel's eyes seemed to be looking at a place just past my shoulder and he slept more, and the hospice nurse showed me how to listen to his breath with a little stethoscope she let me keep, how the body knows its own tides, and I found myself sitting up at night, our house quiet, the dishwasher hummed, Daisy snored, and I sat by his bed like a sentry and a midwife to a birth that was a going, not a coming, and once. At 3 a.m, when the clock on the microwave blinked 3:03 in blue, he woke and asked, Is it raining? And I said, No, love, it's just the leaves, and he said, I dreamed we were at the lake, and I told him, We can go there now if you want. And he smiled, a small smile. I can see it. And he drifted again, and I stayed holding a hand that was getting lighter and heavier at the same time. And later, when the nurse came and I finally let myself sleep, I had the dream too, the lake and the dock and the little boat, and in the dream we didn't need oars. We just drifted, and drifted under a sky that held. The kids said their goodbyes in the ways kids do, by telling him about their days, their Lego creations, their latest library books, by kissing his cheek and saying, See you in the morning. And I didn't correct them because I have learned that children teach us how to believe in morning even when we're buried in night. The last day, he woke up clear as water just at sunrise and asked for coffee, and the nurse said it was okay to let him taste it even if he didn't swallow much, and he held the mug and breathed it in like a prayer and he looked around the room, the drawings, the twinkle lights that I left up because I wanted every light we could possibly have, and he said, Promise me you'll take them to the lake. He meant our little cheap cabin by the water we couldn't afford to own but could rent sometimes when the school calendar allowed, and he said, Promise me you'll let people help even when you don't want to. Because he knew me, and he said, It's okay to be happy, and I said, I promise. even though I didn't know how, and he said the same thing he said the night before our wedding when we were sitting in his old truck outside the diner where we met. "I'm not leaving you." And I whispered back, "I know." And then the morning stretched, and the afternoon bent toward evening, and his breath did the thing the nurse had told me it might do, the spacing and the slow. And I lay in the crook of his arm on the little bed squeezed between the couch and the window, while the kids built a fort in the next room because that's how they could be brave. And when the moment came, it was so gentle I didn't believe it at first. He exhaled, and it was like he had put finally down what he'd been carrying, and nothing in the room moved, but everything changed. And I put my palm on his chest and said, "I love you." And then I called the nurse like we'd planned, and she came and she was kind. And Daisy put her head on the edge of the bed like she didn't understand why he didn't pet her, but also like she did. And the kids came in and we cried in a circle, and I felt like the ceiling pressed down and also like something had lifted. Not because he was gone, but because the fight was over, and he didn't have to hold up the sky anymore. The days after were a blur of casseroles left on our stoop, and phone calls and paperwork that felt both trivial and enormous. The funeral service was at the church with the creaky pews and the stained glass that always made Nora whisper that it looked like a candy store window. And Eli stood up with his coach beside him and said, "My dad taught me to tie my shoes without loops. He said double knotting was how people who want to keep running tie their shoes." And the room laughed and sniffed. And I stood at the podium and looked out at faces I knew and faces I didn't, and I told the story of how we met. How he had argued lovingly with me about the best way to hang Christmas lights, top down or bottom up, and how he would drive the long way home if the sunset was good, and I said, "He wasn't perfect. He left the milk out a lot, and he once wore 2 different shoes to a parent-teacher conference, but he was exactly who he said he'd be." And I looked at Eli and Nora and said, "He did not leave us. He has just gone to wait where the light is different, and he's the same through and through." And someone said later that what I said was brave, but it wasn't bravery. It was survival. It was saying words out loud so they could stop choking me. People tell you lots of things after a death. They tell you that time heals, and that grief is a wave, and that you'll find a new normal, and that everything happens for a reason, and that God must have needed another angel. And some of those things made me want to scream, and some made me nod because they lined up with the truth my body knew. And what I can tell you is that grief showed up as a fog that moved in and out of rooms with me. It made me forget what I had walked into the kitchen for. It made me cry at the sight of jars, because Daniel used them for screws, and I still couldn't find anything without him. And it softened me toward people in a way I hadn't expected. The woman in the grocery store crying quietly by the bread. I put my hand on her shoulder and said, "Me too," even though I didn't know her story, because I knew the look of someone trying to remember how to breathe. I started a ritual the week after the funeral, the one I'd promised the first night to myself without knowing I was promising it. I began to talk to his picture on the mantel every night after the kids were asleep. The photo from that last backyard picnic, where he's wearing a daisy crown and holding both kids like they weigh nothing. And I'd stand in my pajamas with my hair piled on my head and say anything and everything. Some nights practical things like, "The garage door sticks now. I'm going to call someone. I hope that's okay." And other nights I'd laugh and tell him about Nora's teacher who wears SpongeBob socks, and how Eli broke the blender trying to make a smoothie with a frozen banana that could have broken a window. And I'd whisper the things I was scared to say to anyone else. "I found your hammer in the back of the pantry. What were you even doing?" And "I slept on your side of the bed, and it smelled like less than you, and I hated that." And sometimes I just cried, and sometimes I didn't cry at all, and it was like leaving the porch light on for someone who'd already come home, like a way to say to the universe, "He was here, he is here." And I don't know if he can hear me, but I know I can hear myself, and that matters. The letters were our breadcrumb trail through time. On Eli's 11th birthday, we sat on the floor, and I handed him an envelope addressed in his dad's careful block letters, and he looked at me like, "Are you sure?" And I nodded, and he opened it and read slowly, out loud at first and then to himself. And it was full of the kind of specifics Daniel always knew made a person feel seen. "I bet you're into a new game or a new book right now, and I hope it's teaching you something about yourself. And remember when you learned to ride your bike and you fell and swore you'd never try again. You tried again. That's who you are." And Eli cried, and I cried, And then he laughed at the end where Daniel wrote, "Don't double space after periods. It's a new world now. Your mom will explain." Because he knew that would get to Eli, who delights in rules. And after we hugged, Eli ran outside and threw a ball against the garage for an hour. And the thump, thump, thump was the most beautiful beat I'd heard since the last time Daniel's heart had kicked under my ear. For our 15th anniversary, I opened my envelope and it said, "If we're here together, I love you. If I'm not there, I still love you." That part didn't change. And he told me to listen for robins in the spring, and to always keep a spare roll of toilet paper under the sink, even if I thought it was unnecessary, because that's the kind of mistake that turns a day bad fast. And he told me to paint our bedroom the color I wanted without waiting for a weekend to do it together. And he told me I never needed him to be whole. I wanted him to, and that's different. And I bawled on the living room rug, and then I got up and went to the hardware store and got a swatch book, and now the room is the color of warm oatmeal with a hint of sunlight, and it makes waking up quieter. Grief is not a straight line. It's a kid's drawing with loops and stars and squiggles, and there were days I felt like a functional adult. I packed lunches with cut-up apples and peanut butter tucked into a little container. I answered emails and paid bills and scheduled parent-teacher conferences, and even remembered to put gas in the car before the light came on. And then there were days where the sight of his baseball cap on the hook by the door made my knees go watery, and I had to sit down on the stairs and breathe into my hands, and let the dog lick my calf, because she felt the shift in the air and came to steady me. And there were nights I woke up convinced I'd heard him whisper my name, and the room would hold that silence like a bowl. And I'd rearrange the pillows and go check the kids, and then stand in the kitchen in the blue light from the microwave clock, and pretend he was just in the garage finishing that bookcase. People said to make new rituals, so I did. We went to the lake in June like I'd promised, and I stood on the crooked dock at dusk and threw the first 4 rocks because we each took one in turn. For Daddy, and for all the Tuesdays, and for the time he taught me to whistle, and for the time he told me I could love math and painting at the same time and it was fine. And the circles on the water kept widening until they crossed, and it felt like a benediction. We lit a small paper lantern in the backyard one Sunday night and sent it up with the kids holding my hands, and it caught a breeze and drifted toward the dark trees, and I whispered, "Find him!" Even though I knew he didn't need finding. He was braided into everything already. There was a day in September when I finally admitted we couldn't stay in the house without fixing the roof. The leak had turned the corner of our bedroom ceiling into a soft spot that looked like a sore, and I sat with the estimate on the dining room table next to a bowl of apples, and I felt overwhelmed down to my toes. And then Mrs. Klein knocked on the back door and let herself in like she does and said, "I knew you'd need this," and put a folded piece of paper in my hand. It was from a small fund the church had set up for us with donations from the community, and I cried so hard I scared her, and then she made tea in my kitchen like a mother and tucked me into my own booth like we were at a restaurant. Drink. And the roof got fixed, and the first big autumn rain sounded like applause on a stage instead of dread. And I sent a group text that said, "I can never repay you, but I will pay it forward." And then I signed up to organize a meal train for a woman across town with a newborn and no family nearby, because grief had turned me into a person I liked better, less concerned about appearances, more concerned about casseroles. By winter, the kids had settled into a version of routine that without Daniel didn't mean it wasn't family. Eli played basketball at the rec center on a team with shirts that said Hawks, and he wore his dad's old wristband under his jersey, a kind of talisman, and Nora joined ballet and came home in black tights and a messy bun, and would practice until the rug slipped crooked on the hardwood, and then she'd carefully straighten it because she knew it would drive me bananas if it stayed that way. We decorated the house with paper snowflakes and didn't quite manage a tree because the kids voted to try stringing cranberries on the railing instead. And Christmas morning was quieter and harder and still beautiful. I made cinnamon rolls that burned on the bottom because I got distracted, and we ate them anyway. And we opened the letter that said, "First snow." And it told the kids to blast music and dance in front of the window where the snow made everything look like a snow globe. And we did. We danced and laughed, and it felt like Daniel had set a trap for joy, and we had stumbled right into it. The last soft cliffhanger of that first year came in the spring when I finally opened the envelope in the back of the shoebox that didn't have an occasion written on it. It just said, "For when you need it." And I had had a day of small, misshapen difficulties. The dog got into the trash. The dishwasher leaked. Nora forgot her lunch, and I didn't realize until my meeting was starting. And the neighbor's car backed into my trash bins, and they spilled into the street like confetti. And I came home. Dropped my purse and sat on the floor, and I reached for the box without thinking and opened the envelope, and it said, "Here is the thing no one can tell you because they don't know you like I do. You will build something new out of this. You always have. You built our family out of nothing but a second-hand couch and a plant we couldn't keep alive, and you made it beautiful. And you will do this again, and it will not be the same. Do not try to make it the same. It will be true, and true is better than perfect." And I read it twice, and then I laughed because he added at the end, "Also, check the lint trap." And sure enough, the dryer wasn't working right because I'd ignored the lint trap for too long. And I cleaned it, and it felt like it felt when you think you've lost your keys and then find them in your coat pocket. I think about what I would tell myself that day in the parking lot with the dinosaur in the cup holder and the doctor's words filling the space like smoke. And I think I'd tell her to accept every offer of help and to stop Googling things at 2 in the morning, to kiss her husband's forehead 10 more times than she thinks necessary, and to write down the little phrases he says because those will be the soundtrack when your mind goes blank with grief. And to throw as many backyard picnics under twinkle lights as you can, because twinkle lights are cheap and miracles. I tell her that love promises, and sometimes love can't keep the exact outline of a promise, so it keeps the heart of it instead. And that is not a failure. That is love's genius. I tell her that death did come, and it did not get the last word. Because every morning Eli puts on his sneakers and double knots them and walks out the door with his shoulders square. And Nora wears her ballet shoes and spins until she has to widen her arms to keep from falling and then laughs about it. And I make coffee for one and still set out 2 mugs on accident, and then I put one back and I don't fall apart every time. And at night I talk to his picture because the night is wide, and I know that some answers you have to make yourself by saying the questions out loud. Maybe it makes me seem a little unhinged to people who haven't lost like this, but I do not care. I stand in my kitchen and whisper, "Do you see this life, Dan? It's messy and it's ours and it's still good." And I understand now more than I ever did that family is not one person. It is a pattern you keep weaving with whoever is here. Neighbors and church friends and coaches and old ladies who keep tissues up their sleeves and kids who play jingle bells in May just because they feel like it. And the moral, if there has to be one, is that love is in the showing up, in the casseroles and the carpool and the hands that turn off the porch light when you finally go to bed. And in the talking to the picture, because you promised him, you wouldn't let silence come between you and you haven't. I keep telling this story in small pieces because every time I speak it, I feel the weight of it shift a little. Less like a boulder I'm hauling and more like the kind of rock you put in your pocket to remember who you are. And if you're listening and you've held something like this, I hope you feel less alone in your kitchen at midnight with the microwave clock glaring the truth at you. And if this resonated, I'd be grateful if you tap like and subscribe to hear more families who made it through the long night with their porch lights on. What would you have done if you were me, in that exam room, at that ball field, on that last night under the twinkle lights?